really, what I wanted to just spend a few minutes on before we get to our panel discussion was just how do you bridge the gap between sort of that prevention and that, that genetic movement that's really coming around precision medicine and precision health, and where does that fit within disease prevention overall, and where does that fit within this real need, I would say, for sustainable habit change? And so, I guess that the case for disease prevention is pretty stark. When you look at that sort of macro to micro, where I'll go in just a couple moments, macro, $3.6 trillion is the annual U.S. healthcare spend now, which healthcare is a bit of a misnomer. I mean, most of those dollars, well over 80%, are going toward traditional sick care services today. Not a whole lot of focus on keeping healthy people healthy. Rather, it's dealing with individuals who are already sick. But when you look at the burden that's about to come, so that 3.6 trillion or 18% of U.S. GDP is already awfully high. But when you look at the burden of 50% of the population with elevated risk factors, things like waist circumference, blood pressure, blood glucose, triglycerides, or cholesterol, which are sort of near-term indications of breakdown in human health, body is not going in the right direction. And if those trends continue, 50% of that population start to line up to become amongst the 20% that are driving most of those costs. But in a time when you've got an aging population that's also driving incredibly high costs, you've got all of these risk factors lining up, boy, there's a tsunami of potential chronic disease, which just presents complete unaffordability and unsustainability. The system will expand and grow, but to what point? And so I say the need for disease prevention is pretty stark, not only as an opportunity to where can we find value in a system that unfortunately has not been traditionally great at delivering value, but there's a real opportunity to catch individuals before they go off the proverbial cliff at a time when that 50% of the population and all of those chronic diseases, things like obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, stroke, even NASH, are entirely, almost 100% preventable. There's some genetic causation, but largely around lifestyle. And so then when we get to the question of if we all are shaking our heads and agreeing that there's a case for disease prevention, now getting to the question of, well, what's the best way to do that? And how do we deliver? And I think there are really two schools of thought out there. One school is very loudly, coming out around, let's deal with prevention the way that we've dealt with education in the past, right? And so all of us have gone to some form of school. Many of us have gone to school for an awful long time. And the traditional education form has been, let's create a curriculum or different curriculums in different topics, and then let's gather groups of us in classrooms, whether they be virtual or in person, and let's teach that curriculum with the hope that in teaching it, we're going to build a certain knowledge base, and that knowledge base will help us change our activities and our actions. And what I've just defined is exactly the way that a large chunk of prevention today, largely for diabetes, is being put forward. It's largely coming out of the CDC's Diabetes Prevention Program, which is a wonderful curriculum and a wonderful approach to teaching what I call the lifestyle 101s, the basics of the right eating, the right activity, the right behavior. But the challenge is that with a 16-week one-size-fits-all curriculum, the hope there is that knowledge is going to drive the right amount of behavior change to potentially prevent nearly 100 million Americans from preventing type 2 diabetes, which has a terrible health and cost burden. Health burden to the individual, cost burden to either the self-insured employers or fully insured payers out there. What's the alternative approach is a habit change approach. And that's very much not so much believing that the answer is in knowledge and education, but it's really in looking at taking proven habit change models out there, which require really one-size-fits-one thinking. It's about not only getting the right content, but also making sure that the delivery is not about, again, how do we teach someone to build knowledge, but rather how do we build confidence and how do we build new sustainable habits so those outcomes grow over time. And ultimately, the case for sustainable habit change doesn't mean there's no place for knowledge and education. Of course there is. But knowledge and education without habit change is likely going to lead to some short-term outcomes, But there's that risk of the boomerang effect coming back, which is once the knowledge is built, but there's no change in habit, you've got that risk that all the gains that are met in a short period of time, sometimes at 16 weeks or sometimes at a year, will start to come back. And many of us who have taken courses know that the knowledge is there, but it doesn't necessarily change our behavior. So the case for habit change is, how do we get to one size fits one thinking? How do we build one by one by one? And whether it's leveraging tools like genetics that we just heard about or others, it's that case for, can we build those new sustainable habits and deliver outcomes that not only are meaningful to reduce risk and reduce cost, but that grow over time, so that there's both insurance for the individual participating and also insurance for either the insurer or employer who are investing, to make sure that those costs and those investments are going to yield really positive results. And so ultimately, the search for habit change or learning education, all are really important. I think there's a huge opportunity to bend the cost curve at the at-risk populations, and it's really just a methodological choice of which are yielding those outcomes and which is the best way. But no matter what, we've really got to focus on prevention to get us out of the mess that we're in.
Well said. Well said. It still comes full circle back to, how do we take what we know and do something about it?
Very much.
Right?